Hi, I'm Paul Germain. Welcome to another session of Smart Boating. As you know, if you watched the show before, we cover a variety of topics, from hurricane protection to man overboard. And the general idea is to give you some information that will help you make smarter decisions and have more fun on the water. Today's show is a little different. It's a little side trip to a place I think you'll find interesting. We're at the New Hampshire Boat Museum in Wolfeboro, New Hampshire, and we're here to see some of the very interesting collection of boats that they have. And joining us is an expert in the area. His name is John Vann. John?
Glad to have you here, Paul.
Welcome
to the New Hampshire Boat Museum.
Thank you very much. Before we get into the show, which is going to be really interesting, can you share a little bit about your boating background and a little bit about the museum?
Well, my boating background began when I was a small elementary school child, and essentially my grandfather would take me fishing in his rowboat in Reeds Lake in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so we'd go out into the lake at the crack of dawn, and I'd sit there with a fishing pole for a while, and I got tired of that, and so he'd let me row the boat, and that was the beginning of it.
All right, then a long journey in the
long journey
world
through boating. The New Hampshire Boat Museum was started in 1992 by a group of boating enthusiasts, and we've been really fortunate to have a lot of really gifted women who have been a part of this organization. Women like Linda DeBica, Jeannie Lewis, our current director, Martha Cummings, and so that's unusual in boating, and we think that's a great plus for this museum.
That is. What's the mission of the museum?
The mission of the museum is to preserve and interpret boating on the freshwater lakes and rivers in New Hampshire, and to inspire people in boating. And so it really ties in very well with what you're doing in terms of smart boating.
Right.
These are our roots, and we want to inform people about boating. And we like to say that if all you see are the boats at the museum, you've missed most of the museum, because what's special about it are all the programs that we have. Boat building, sailing lessons, kids discovery camp, lake discovery, boat restoration. If you have an interest in boating, there's a program that will involve you and entice you and enthuse you about boating in New Hampshire.
I bet. Well, we've got a lot of interesting boats here, so I'm going to go off camera for most of the show, then I'm going to rejoin you at the end, okay?
Great.
All right. Well, every boat features different types of construction typically. How about this Geschwin, John? How was this built? What was involved?
This is a very simplistic mode of build. It is essentially what is called a clinker built, which is a lap strike style of construction. And this is single plank on frame. There's nothing complex about the building of this boat. It was simple and efficient and inexpensive. And it's inexpensive all the way up to the deck hardware. You'll see a single cleat in the center of the foredeck, essentially on the strength member here. You'll see a cast bronze bow chock there and nose ring for it. So unlike some of the more expensive boats, this was simple and cheap.
Okay, and it had some coaming around the cockpit to keep the waves out, I guess.
You got some coaming around it to keep the waves out. It was probably originally sold with a windshield. That does not exist. At least from the advertisements at the 1928 boat show, we believe that it was shown with a windshield, and it may have been shown with some cushions that no longer exist in this boat either, Paul.
All right. Well, John, looking at the interior of this Geschwin, it seems pretty simple and straightforward.
It is. It's as simple as could be in most respects. There are a couple of interesting design anomalies in this boat, such as this center section behind the main cockpit. But the cockpit itself is really easy. And you get a sense of just how inexpensive the construction was because you can see the plank on frame in here. Simple pine frames, Philippine mahogany plank, cedar floorboards. It was all easy maintenance. But it was designed to look like it was expensive.
Right. As we move backward, we get into the second
the second cockpit, and this is one of the most interesting features of this whole boat, Paul. This boat is not an inboard. It is actually an outboard designed to look like an inboard. So what he did was, Geschwin designed an offset transom in the back of this boat where you could put an engine that could easily be lifted on and off and maintained by the by the boat's owners. Now, that created an interesting problem, and that is that when you started the motor, most of which for this period were direct drives in 1928,
Yes.
you had to then hop over the middle seat and get into the front seat pretty quick to drive it.
Right.
And likewise, when you came into the dock, you had to come in, position where the boat was going, jump to the back and kill the motor before you hit the dock. Maybe that's why there's not so many of these in existence.
True.
But this was shown at the 1928 New York Boat Fair, Paul. And at the New York Boat Show of that year, we also know that DeWitt showed boats, such as the DeWitt boat that we looked at earlier. Their designer was a man named Russell Puleo, and Russell Puleo was at that exhibit. Guesswine could not sustain his company more than another year. So in 1929, he went out of business. And in 1929, Russell Puleo applied for a patent on an offset transom that looked exactly like this transom. So did he patent his idea? Did he take somebody else's idea and modify it for his own use? We'll never know, but it's an interesting little industrial espionage mystery that has yet to be solved.
John, a museum like the New Hampshire Boat Museum carries a variety of boats. Some are well known and some are not. This particular brand was one of the better known, right?
This is a very well-known brand, Paul. This is a Lyman. Lyman was started by two brothers, Bernard and Herman Lyman, in the 1870s. They were furniture makers in Cleveland, Ohio, built boats in their spare time, and their boats became so popular that they ended up creating a whole boat factory in Sandusky, Ohio.
Oh, yeah.
And they remained in Sandusky until 1973. Lyman boats just create passion in their owners because they are unique and well-built boats. The style of boat is called the clinker built.
Yeah.
And so it looks like lapstrake siding on your house. Each of the strakes is put over a set of ribs and then carefully nailed with copper nails that are then precisely bent to hold it into place. The lap straking causes the boat to ride really well in choppy waters, which was typical of Great Lakes and Midwestern boating.
John, this Lyman's a little bit unusual in terms of most Lymans are painted, and this boat's bright.
This boat is bright. It's exceptional in that regards, and to the best of our knowledge, it was never painted. It was not stripped and restored. There was no paint on the exterior of this hull.
Now,
so this hull was sold in 1940 in this configuration.
Okay, some people would call it a pre-war boat, and they use a variety of planking materials, I guess, in that period.
By then, with World War II coming on, mahogany was becoming scarce.
Yes.
And so a lot of boats are built with other hardwoods, southern cypress, cedar, and the like. And so this boat has very little mahogany built into it. It's got a fair amount of oak on it, which is unusual for strength members particularly when we look at the interior of it.
Yeah.
But you can see the bow of this boat is really pretty simplistic.
Yes.
These boats were built in 11, 13-foot, and 15-foot configurations, and they were essentially sold to Midwestern fishermen, boating enthusiasts, hunters, recreational boaters, and the like. And they were designed to be coupled with a motor and sold as a package on a trailer. And after World War II, these boats just blossomed.
Right, particularly the outboards, right? Because the outboards were, you had trouble getting the inboard engines, but the outboards were available, so that made them very popular. And this has got the traditional canvas over a wood deck on it,
Canvas over a wood deck on it, front seat designed to face forward on it, and then the back half of this boat is all set up for your fishing enthusiast. And it is a remarkable boat for fishermen.
John, you get boats in a variety of different conditions here at the museum. This one, I see 3 medallions on the front dash there that indicate it was judged, and it judged very highly.
This boat was shown in a number of different shows, and it is an award winner in its class. And it is an award winner for a number of different reasons. One is the condition that the boat has been maintained in. All of the bright work is pristine, original woodwork in the boat. And so it represents the epitome of a Lyman boat of this period and of this configuration.
Can you walk us through the boat? I see you got the forward-facing seat there.
We got forward-facing seats. This boat is set up in a fishing configuration. So you could easily put the kids in the front seat, trailer the boat to your location, and put them in the front seat, launch the boat, and then go fishing with them.
Yeah.
Back here we have the reserve gas tank for when you were out there. And then you have the back seating. So you could have somebody sitting on these back seats, or they could sit in the side seats as well.
Okay.
And the side seats were advantageous because as you were trolling, you'd want to be able to steer and control your motor to a trolling speed.
Right.
And because these were sold to fishermen, they all came with hidden drawers under the seats to keep the fishing tackle.
Well, that's a very interesting propulsion plant on the stern. What is that?
That's a 1931 OMC engine. So somebody buying a boat in this period, 1940 to essentially 1960, is probably going to buy a used motor. And this would be an example of a used OMC. OMC is a motor company that was essentially run by Ollie Evinrude. Evinrude sold his own Evinrude business, started Alto Motors, and then came back and bought them all, combined them into one, and it was called Outboard Marine Corporation. And this is a little 4-horse, perfect for fishing, trolling,
Yeah.
2 spark plugs, twin cylinders, easy maintained on either side, carburetor, rich control, and throttle in the center of the motor. And of course, as every old boater remembers, long before electric starts, you had to work to get your motor going.
John, you've got boats from a variety of different manufacturers here, and this particular one is very, very unusual, isn't it?
It is a very rare boat, but it is also a local boat to our area, Paul. This boat was made by the Laconia Car Company in Laconia, across on the other side of the big lake. And the Laconia Car Company was originally started in the 1800s to manufacture railroad cars and horse-drawn trolleys, essentially out of wood. And they became world famous for their railroad cars and became the largest employer of the state of New Hampshire at one point, over 1,000 workers, 1,200 workers. And there are still remnants of their factory in Laconia today. But after World War I, steel came in, and they were interested, people were interested in steel box cars, and automobiles replaced trolleys. So in order to try to keep the business afloat and burn up their back stock of wood, they decided to try to build boats.
Okay.
And this is a Laconia boat, and it's made out of solid mahogany. It's hard as a rock, weighs a ton. But this was sold for the huge price of $369 in 1928, and it was sold fully equipped. Now this boat as we have it today is preserved. It's not been restored.
Okay.
And so it's been pretty stripped down. It still has its original windshield configuration, but this was sold with cushions, steering wheel, it had a fire extinguisher in it, it had all the accessories, it had fenders, paddles, oars, whatever accessory you wanted, they would throw in for that low price, and they still couldn't sell it. So they dropped the price to $222, and it still didn't sell.
Oh.
But luckily, we've still got one today, and it's an interesting boating artifact.
Well, John, this Laconia Car Company boat really has an interesting shape to it. All mahogany?
It is an all mahogany boat. It is close grain mahogany. It is solid as a rock, and it weighs a ton. And obviously they wanted to unload what kind of wood they had, and they had a bunch of this. And so they thought making an all mahogany boat would cause that boat to sell better.
Right.
It didn't.
Right, and it's so it's a strip plank.
It is a
Silver
plank. It is plank on
frame.
frame. It is a single plank on frame.
Oh, okay.
And so when you first put the boat in the water for the season, you needed to soak it a little bit so it would swell up. Otherwise, it would take water.
Yeah.
It is a long, narrow boat.
Yes.
And it's not a particularly seaworthy boat.
Oh,
It
okay.
does not do good in heavy water. But this boat was shown at the 1928 New York Boat Show, and they asked people who attended the show to come up with a name for this kind of boat.
Okay.
And so a woman won the contest, and it was called a Sportster, and she won a free boat.
Oh, she
Wasn't
did.
this one, but this one still exists.
Yes.
So,
John, in contrast to some of the other boats we've seen, the interior of this boat is pretty simple.
it really is simple, Paul. It's pretty bare bones, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And notice that compared to some of the other boats that we've seen, there's no instrumentation in the
Right.
front of this boat. There's no fancy levers or gauges. It has the original steering wheel, which is essentially a hub wheel, but that's the extent of it.
And it looks like, from what I see, people sat almost on the floor.
They literally almost sat on the floor, and they would have been below water level at that point.
Oh, they would have-
So there was not a lot of freeboard in this boat, which is part of why they didn't handle all that well.
I see.
In heavy water, you could easily get wet in one of these.
Okay. And we had seating up front. And then
Seating was
you've
up
got
front.
Seating back here, too.
Split cockpit to the
Split
back,
cockpit, yeah.
supposedly to leave enough room for your passengers to be comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it would have been sold with cushions
Mm-hmm.
and a variety of accessories. The back of the back seat originally folded down towards the front.
Okay.
And so that would allow you to get back to the motor
Yes.
that you had at the time.
Well, that's a pretty
now,
interesting motor we got on
Well,
the back here. What's that about?
This boat is a 1928 boat, and that's a 1923 Alto rudder twin motor. And what makes that motor really interesting is that after Ollie Evinrude sold his Evinrude Motors business, he couldn't stay away from them. So 5 years later, he started Alto, which stood for Evinrude Light Twin Outboard, a name that was created by his wife Bessie. And these outboards had twin cylinders on them. They developed a fair amount of horsepower for a little motor, and it was designed to provide a consistent fishing motor. They had a battery. You needed a 9-volt battery in order to keep the spark going. They didn't have a magneto.
Okay.
It's got a single carburetor, and it actually doesn't have a distributor. It's just got this little clicker on the top that would be a spark and go mechanism to spark the plugs alternately. The mechanism on the top is the flywheel and starter.
Oh, yeah.
And so what you do is put the lever in the proper position, throw that wheel backwards, and that would put gas into the cylinder heads, and then they'd fire, and that would start to spin forwards in a clockwise motion. As you can see, the effect of doing that with that knob on top could easily end up smacking you in the knuckles.
Right.
And so they were affectionately known as knuckle busters.
They were. And then these didn't steer like you see a typical outboard steer today. They almost have like a rudder-like arrangement behind the propeller,
yeah,
right?
originally this one, the motor didn't turn like most outboards that you'd know. The rudder on this, which actually also has the intake for the water cooling system in it, the propeller would push that water into that hollow rudder and up into the motor. But this is what provided your steerage to this boat. And he sold these for a number of different years and ended up developing the basics of this motor into a racing motor that set a lot of the speed records for outboard racing in the 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Well, John, in the old days, boats were built all over the place. A lot of them are up around Michigan. But this boat came from Indiana, right?
This boat did come from Indiana, and it's an interesting boat for a number of different reasons. In the 1920s, as the economy got tight, there was an interest in finding alternative materials to expensive wood boats. This boat is made out of galvanized steel, and it was made in Goshen, Indiana by the Star Tank Company.
Star Tank.
They built feed and water tanks for farmers in the Midwest and other farm accessories. And in their spare time, they came up with the idea that they could create a fishing or pleasure boat made out of galvanized steel, the same way that they put a tank together.
Oh, yeah.
And this boat is built like a tank. This boat was restored as part of our museum programs. We have a variety of programs, and one of those is boat restoration. And so a crew of volunteers over the course of a winter stripped this boat down. It still has a patch of bare galvanized steel, and redid all of the bright work and repainted it to its original green color.
Okay, yeah, it's a very unusual green. Yeah. And those were those welded together or riveted together?
They're actually both. As you look inside, you'll see a section where they're riveted, and then they're covered by a conjoined weld. They also have flotation tanks under the bow, the middle seat, and the back seat area, so that should you actually take water and go down, the boat would not be completely lost.
Well, John, this is a pretty roomy 16-footer. This would be ideal for a fisherman or someone like that, right?
This was an ideal boat for a fisherman, Paul, and it is a very roomy 16-footer. You'll notice it's got a pretty wide beam compared to the Laconia boat that we just saw that was pretty narrow of beam and a little unsteady in the water. This was designed to take your family out for the day and enjoy some recreation. It was set up so that it was originally rowable by 1 or 2 people, could be easily rowed through the water, and the family could enjoy a day on the water. It's set up so that you could go out and picnic as it's set today, or water ski behind it, go fishing off of it. But it was designed so that it was easy to maintain.
Yes.
Now, Star Tank Company became the Star Tank and Boat Company, and eventually Starcraft Industries was spun off of that, and Starcraft still makes boats today. And their reputation is that they are still easily maintained, steel boats, and they're still run by the great-grandson of Arthur Schrock, who started this company in 1903.
The interior of this boat is an interesting blend, John, of metal and polished wood.
It is. That most of the wood that you see in this boat is all Brightwork wood. Now, my guess is that most people who owned this boat actually probably painted it all.
Yes, low maintenance.
But low maintenance. And you'll see that the floorboards in this boat are basically inexpensive painted pine floorboards, just designed to keep your feet out of the water.
Yep.
But this was restored to its original marketed condition with the Brightwork in it.
All right,
And
so
that's how it was sold.
we got seating in the bow. We've got a couple seats along the way
Seating
here.
in the bow, room for all of your kids, and a nice Johnson outboard on the back of it that you could teach your kids to water ski off of.
Now you've got an old original gas tank here too, huh?
It is. This Johnson is a 1950 Johnson, and there's the beginning of your original pressurized tank. And so you had a lot of room to fill your tank here, but you had to hand pressurize it with this little pump to get it going.
Right.
And then you'd go back and you'd pull the motor to start it. And most of you are familiar with this, that has a neutral, start, and then essentially the accelerator built into it. That's not what this is. This has a start position and a run position on it. And this boat has a direct drive. There's no neutral on that motor. And all your rich and lean was controlled off of the motor back here. So eventually all of that became integrated into the handle. But in this one, they were still trying to figure that all out.
Well, John, it's hard to believe, but it's time to wrap up the show today. And it's been a really fun show because there's so many interesting boats and exhibits here at the museum. But before we wrap it up, is there anything you'd like to add before the end?
Well, Paul, thank you for being here and helping to show the boats of the New Hampshire Boat Museum. We have over 600 members. We have 10,000 visitors a year and over 200 volunteers that help to put all of this together.
Wow.
We're also in the process of building a new museum.
Really?
And so we're really excited that we're going to have 10,000 square feet of exhibit place, offices, and educational opportunities in the museum. So we hope that people out there in Smart Boating Land will come to the museum, stop and see our website before you come so you can see everything that's going on. It's nhbm.org, New Hampshire Boat Museum.org, and you can find all about the museum.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks,
Thank you.
Paul.
And thank you, Smart Boating viewers, for watching today. If you have comments or questions or just want to see another show, join us at www.smartboatingus.com. Thank you.